Good afternoon from Westminster. Prime Minister's Questions is about to get underway in the Commons. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, is here with me now. Sam, what can we expect?
The Prime Minister focusing on, we're trying to turn the page on from yesterday's winter fuel rebellion, 50-plus abstentions, talking today about steel and talking today about reform to renters and their relationship with tenants, new legislation being brought in by the government. Rishi Sunak probably looking to punch the bruise of the government on the revolt yesterday and also just use this opportunity, which is the last before we go out for the conference season, in order to just generally assert his role as leader of the opposition, something he has come under a bit of fire for not doing very much on, because, of course, we are in the middle stages of the now four-way Tory leadership contest to select his successor, but that won't conclude until mid-October. So this isn't the last PMQs from Rishi Sunak. It's probably his fourth from final one. I don't think he particularly relishes doing it in this way, but here he is, and here's the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This weekend we remembered the late Queen and her enduring legacy of service and devotion to our country. And I was proud to announce a new national monument located at St James's Park to honour her memory. And I know the whole House will join me in sending our best wishes to the Princess of Wales as she completes her treatment. Mr. Speaker, this afternoon we'll introduce the Renters' Rights Bill. After years of inaction, this government will oversee the biggest levelling up of renters' rights in a generation, and I urge the whole House to get behind it. And later this week, I'll visit Washington to meet President Biden for a strategic discussion on foreign policy. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in the House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Back in the 1990s, the Conservatives claimed that the minimum wage would cost 1 million jobs. Instead, low earners have seen the fastest pay rises year after year, with no effect on employment. Year after year, which they oppose. Today, and under their watch, 1 million workers are on 0 hours contracts, and over a million people have no sick pay whatsoever, facing risks that nobody in this House would bear. The details matter, but it is outdated nonsense.
Order. Please sit. One, it's easier if you face me, I can hear it better. But the second part is it's meant to be a question, not a statement. No, I decide. Prime Minister, don't I?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Economic growth is our #1 mission, and that's why we forged a new positive relationship with business. But too many people are insecure at work, and that holds them back and holds our economy back. This government was elected to deliver for working people, and that is exactly what we will do.
We come to the Leader of the Opposition, Rishi Sunak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join with the Prime Minister in his words about Her late Majesty, the Queen, but also in his words about the Princess of Wales? She's been in the thoughts of everyone across the country, and I know everyone in the House will be delighted and relieved at the progress that she has made. May I also, Mr. Speaker, take this opportunity to pay tribute to Nicholas Howard. This is his last Prime Minister's Questions after supporting 8 consecutive Prime Ministers through these sessions. Never my favourite part of the week, but his commendable service made it far more manageable. Mr. Speaker, yesterday, Labour MPs voted to remove the winter fuel payment from over 10 million British pensioners, including those with just £13,000 of income. With that decision debated and made, it is now important that the House understands the full consequences of the government's choice. So can I very specifically ask the Prime Minister, will he now publish the impact assessment before the House rises?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is this. They left a £22 billion black hole, and they hid it from the OBR. Richard Hughes is absolutely clear. It's the largest year-ahead overspend outside of the pandemic. Now, of course, when it comes to mitigations and impacts, we put those in place, ramping up pension credit, dealing with housing benefit and linking it, something the party opposite didn't do for years. And because of the tough decisions that we're making to stabilise the economy, we can make sure that the triple lock shows that increases in pensions will outstrip any loss of payments. But before he complains about us clearing up his mess, perhaps he'd like to apologise for the £22 billion black hole.
Mr. Speaker, this has got... Mr. Speaker.
I want to hear the question.
Mr. Speaker, when I was in government, I delivered record increases in the state pension. We protected the winter fuel payment and we gave pensioners cost of living benefits. He's the one that's taking money away from pensioners on £13,000, Mr. Speaker. But this has got nothing to do with the public finances. His own Chancellor just this morning, his MPs may not have been listening to her, his own Chancellor this morning admitted that she would prefer it if this policy didn't even raise any money, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, the government would not have made this decision without an impact analysis. And yesterday, the Energy Minister confirmed that. So I ask, very simply again, why won't he publish the assessment now?
Mr. Speaker, I remember the days when the Conservative Party used to be concerned about balancing the books. They've left a £22 billion black hole. Responsibility for this decision lies there. The only way to rebuild our country and invest in our public services and make sure everyone is better off is if we clear up their mess and deal with the £22 billion black hole. But, Mr. Speaker, last week we learned that the Shadow Housing Secretary was calling for means testing of winter fuel payments. Now it turns out that the Shadow Paymaster General agrees with her and even boasted about texting his own mother saying she didn't need the payment. Until he apologises for the mess they've created, he's no position to criticise the action that we're taking.
Mr. Speaker, they're shouting now, but those arguments didn't even convince 50 of his own MPs, who suddenly found that they had urgent business elsewhere yesterday, Mr. Speaker. But we know why he's hiding the impact assessment. The Labour Party's own previous analysis claimed that this policy could cause 3,850 deaths. So are the numbers in his impact assessment higher or lower than that?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're taking this decision to stabilise the economy. That means we can commit to the triple lock. By committing to the triple lock, we can make sure that payments of state pension are higher, and therefore there's more money in the pocket of pensioners, notwithstanding the tough action that we need to take. But he goes around pretending that everything's fine. That's the argument he tried in the election. And that's why he's sitting there and we are sitting here.
Mr. Speaker, today pensioners watching will have seen that the Prime Minister has repeatedly refused to admit or to publish the consequences of his decision. And we will continue holding him account for that. But changing topics, Mr. Speaker, today is Back British Farming Day, where we recognise that British farmers produce food that is higher quality, has higher welfare standards and higher environmental standards than imported food. And at a time of increasing global volatility, they are also crucial for our food security and national security. Can he therefore confirm, whether he will be adopting the NFU's recent proposal to enshrine a national food security target in law?
Prime Minister.
Well, food security is really important. I'm glad he's raised that. We have talked to the NFU about this, and rural issues are really important, and that's what we fought the election on, why we've got a lot of rural constituencies sitting behind me now. We'll continue to talk to the NFU. We do take food security very, very seriously.
Rishi Sunak.
I'm not sure I did hear a specific answer, Mr. Speaker, but farmers also do great work to preserve the beauty of the British countryside, and something I'm sure that the Prime Minister will appreciate, given his newfound preference for landscapes over political portraiture. But when it comes to land use, when it comes to land use, there are currently protections in place to ensure that the most productive farmland is used for food production rather than alternatives like solar. So does he agree that it is not appropriate or right that developers with a vested interest grade the quality of that farmland themselves? And will he look at making that process independent?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, rural communities were neglected under the last government. Confidence was at an all-time low. And thousands of food and farming businesses have been forced out of business. Now, of course, we will work with them. Of course, we'll get the balance right. But we're again picking up, clearing up the mess and rebuilding our country.
Mr. Speaker, as a glimpse, in Wales, the Labour government hammered farmers, hitting them with top-down eco-targets. And Labour's own assessment of those plans said that it would lead to thousands of job losses, less food security, and destroy rural incomes, while farmers described it as bleak and damaging. So can he reassure English farmers that he won't threaten their livelihoods, and can he rule out imposing those same top-down targets here?
Prime Minister.
We will work with farmers across the whole of the United Kingdom, as we've made clear, to support them. But here we are, absolutely clear. No contrition, no responsibility for the economic black hole, the broken NHS, the prison crisis, the ruinous legacy of 14 years of failure. We've started rebuilding the country, renters reform, house building, GB Energy, National Wealth Fund, Border Security Command, I could go on. Whilst they try to rewrite history, we're getting on with building a better country for the future.
Madam Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the whole House will firstly join me in paying our respects to Lieutenant Rodri Leishan, who tragically passed away last week. My thoughts are with the family, loved ones, HMS Queen Elizabeth crew during this very difficult time. Mr. Speaker, housing in Portsmouth is in dire straits, but local residents in Portsmouth North have valid concerns around population density, infrastructure and the environment. So I'm glad this government is working on delivering affordable housing in the city. Can the Prime Minister ensure that the infrastructure is properly considered and that communities are involved in the planning process for any new developments?
Can I start by saying I'm sure the whole House will want to join me in sending condolences to the family of Lieutenant Leishan. I agree with her on the desperate need for affordable housing, and that's why we're going to deliver the biggest social and affording housing uplift in a generation. We will get Britain building again 1.5 million houses, because the dream of home ownership was snuffed out under the last government.
We now come to the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself and my party with the comments made earlier by the Prime Minister about our amazing late Queen, and also join him in sending our best wishes to Her Royal Highness Princess of Wales. I don't think anyone could have not been moved by her powerful video, and we hope that she'll make a full and speedy recovery. When it comes to fighting cancer, we know all too well that every day counts. But in the last year of the last government, there were over 100,000 patients waiting more than 2 months just to start their urgent cancer treatment, the worst on record. So will the Prime Minister help boost cancer survival rates by guaranteeing that every patient can start their cancer treatment within 62 days?
Well, I thank him for that question on a really important issue, and there's a report out by Lord Darcy tomorrow which will set out in stark terms the failure in terms of cancer treatment under the last government, which is a really serious issue. This timeline matters, which is why we're taking steps straight away to make sure that we can comply with that timeline, because lives depend on it. And that's why we've already taken a decision to put more scanners in to catch this early and use technology. It's a very serious issue, very serious failure by the last government.
Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for that answer, and obviously look at the plans that the government is putting forward. Last night, Liberal Democrats voted against the withdrawing of winter fuel payments. We believe it's just wrong to balance the books by removing the support from pensioners. But we do understand that there are some difficult choices to be made to clear up the appalling financial mess left by the last Conservative government. One of the many reasons for that mess was the Conservatives prioritising tax cuts for the big banks, costing £4 billion a year.
They pay more tax.
So, will the Prime Minister instead reverse those cuts so that we can afford to support millions of struggling pensioners through this very hard winter?
Well, I'll resist the temptation to get ahead of the budget. But look, what is important is that we recognise that there is this £22 billion black hole that's been left by the previous government. Now, I know that their practice was ignore it, to kick it into long grass. We're taking the tough decisions because I'm absolutely convinced that's the only way we can start rebuilding our country, investing in our public services and making sure that everybody is better off.
Patrick Hurley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My Southport constituency has experienced a difficult summer. Firstly, I want to reiterate that our thoughts are with the families of Alice, Bibi and Elsie, who tragically lost their lives in the attack in July. I welcomed the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary to our town in the weeks that followed, and we worked together to find further ways to bring our community together. Can I therefore ask the Prime Minister to take this opportunity to recommit the government's support for our town for those grieving and affected by the tragic attack?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank him for that question, and we stand with those who tragically lost their loved ones in this heinous attack. I did go up to Southport the day after and went back actually 3 days after that on a private visit to meet some of the first responders who had been at the scene and simply to say thank you to them. I can't tell the House how angry I was when I got back to London and saw that those same officers who had responded were having things thrown at them by far-right thugs. Mr. Speaker, we will work tirelessly to support his constituents, and I thank him as well for his hard work in this difficult time, working with Sept and Borough Council and Liverpool City Region Combined Authority to deliver a support package. The communities endured this horrendous event should be supported, and I know will be, across the whole House.
Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday we witnessed some extraordinary celebratory scenes outside Britain's prisons where, in some cases, serious career criminals were released. And this to make way for, yes, rioters, but equally those who've said unpleasant things on Facebook and elsewhere on social media. Does the Prime Minister understand there is a growing feeling of anger in this country that we are living through two-tier policing and a two-tier justice system?
I'm angry to be put in a position of having to release people who should be in prison because the last government broke the prison system. And the Prime Minister was repeatedly warned. He had his own release scheme. He was repeatedly warned that he had to adopt the scheme that we put in place. The former Justice Minister said if we don't do it, we'll have to get down on our knees and pray. The police chiefs made it absolutely clear in a letter to him before the election that he needed to take action, saying that they wouldn't be able to discharge their duties and saying the risk was loss of an ability to detain suspects. That means, Mr. Speaker, an inability to arrest people committing offences. That's how bad it was, and they warned the Leader of the Opposition that further delays until after the general election will increase the risk significantly. What did he do? He delayed and increased the risks.
Talbot, Kearns.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the government's swift action to bring railways back into public ownership. Great British Railways will deliver much-needed reform, ensuring the network serves both passengers and rail freight effectively. So can the Prime Minister explain how Labour's ambitious railway plan will also deliver improvements to rail infrastructure to ensure my constituents get the service they deserve at Luton Station?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank her for raising that important matter. One of the first bills that we introduced was to reform our railways after 14 years of chaos. Great British Railways will unite track and train under a single leadership. And that means closer collaboration across the industry and faster, more effective decisions on critical infrastructure. And I know how vital that will be in relation to both Luton and Leagrave stations in her constituency. We're carefully considering the best approach, but I can assure her we're committed to ensuring our railways will be open to everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is Back British Farming Day. The previous government let our farmers down and in their incompetence underspent the farming budget by £100 million. Will the Prime Minister deny rumours that his government plans to take advantage of the Conservatives' failure by removing that £100 million permanently? Farmers across the country want to know that the Prime Minister will increase the agriculture budget, as the Lib Dem manifesto proposed, to speed up the rollout of the new environmental land management schemes to support profitable, sustainable and nature-friendly farming.
Well, I thank you for that question. It is a really important issue, and our rural communities were neglected by the previous government, and that's why confidence is at an all-time low. And what we will do is to protect farmers from being undercut in trade deals, make the supply chain work more fairly, and prevent shock rises in bills by switching to GB energy. We won't preempt the budget in relation to this, but we will put the support in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of my constituents, including those at Chapel Gate, have told me about the so-called management agents who charge them rip-off service fees and then fail to provide even the most basic of maintenance. Many of them spend hours each week battling with these agents just to ensure that they and their neighbours are not fleeced in their own homes. Will the Prime Minister recommit this government to act where the previous government failed to reform the leasehold system, which is archaic, outdated and feudal?
Prime Minister. Well, can I first welcome the first ever Labour MP for Basingstoke? And yes, we will reiterate our commitment to act to bring the feudal leasehold system to an end and ensure leaseholders can benefit from more rights, power and protections over their homes.
Mr. Speaker, international law is clear. Dropping £2,000 bombs on densely populated civilian areas is a crime. And it's beyond dispute that Israel has used F-35s to do exactly that. Yet the government has chosen to exempt F-35 components from the arms licence suspension, when all it had to do was say that Israel could not be the end user if UK manufactured parts were included. Last week, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister stood at that dispatch box and he said, we either comply with international law or we do not.
That's right.
Why has he chosen not to?
Prime Minister.
We are complying with international law. We've set out our reasoning, and I think all fair-minded members of the House would support the decision that we've taken. The most important thing now is that we get a ceasefire in place. That is one of the topics that I'll be discussing on Friday to ensure that the remaining hostages can come out, that aid that's desperately needed can go in, and we can start the process to a two-state solution, which is the only way to lasting peace.
Fife has a proud defence heritage, and in my constituency of Dunfermline and Dollar, that continues with the dockyard at Rosyth constructing Type 31 frigates for the Royal Navy, along with a local supply chain of local SMEs. So will the Prime Minister ensure the Strategic Defence Review team visits areas of strategic importance such as Fife so they can engage fully with the local supply chain and ensure the SDSR supports Britain's security as well as local economies?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank him for that question and for championing his constituency, including the work at Rosyth Dockyard. The Strategic Defence Review will ensure that defence is central both to security and to economic growth and prosperity. The review will consult widely, including across the devolved nations, and I know the reviewers recognise the strategic importance of constituencies like his, and I will ensure that he gets the chance to meet the relevant minister to discuss the particular issues in his constituency.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The previous Conservative government committed to a rebuild of Whipps Cross Hospital, the Princess Alexandra Hospital in Harlow, and the establishment of a new community
You have to sit down a minute. Look, I'm determined to hear this question. I don't expect the front bench to be shouting me down, and it won't happen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The previous Conservative government...
Trying to join in again?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The previous Conservative government committed to a rebuild of Whipps Cross Hospital, the Princess Alexandra Hospital in Harlow, and the establishment of a new community diagnostic centre at St Margaret's Hospital in Epping. Will the new Labour government honour these commitments and progress these projects in full, which are so vital to improving the health services needed by my constituents of Epping Forest? And if it helps the Prime Minister at all with his answer, these services will also help some of the constituents of his Health Secretary just next door in Ilford North.
Prime Minister.
Well, look, he's right to champion the hospitals in his constituency, quite right to do so. The problem with what the last government promised was this. They promised 40 new hospitals. The problem is there weren't 40, they weren't new, and many of them weren't hospitals. So we need to review what we can do and put it on a sustainable, deliverable basis. But we will, and he's right to champion those in his constituency.
Or are being built.
And Lise Bidgley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, I met my constituent, Cheryl Corbell, mother of Olivia Pratt Corbell, the 9-year-old tragically murdered in 2022. Cheryl is campaigning for Olivia's Law, which would compel convicted criminals to attend court and face the judge and receive their sentence. Will my right honourable friend commit to supporting Olivia's Law and meet Cheryl to discuss how we can move this forward without delay?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in the King's Speech, we confirmed that we intend to introduce legislation this session so courts have the power to order the most serious offenders to attend their sentencing hearings. This is really important, and I know it's felt across the House, because to deprive victims and their families of seeing the sentencing exercise is to deprive them of justice. I will meet Cheryl. I have already met Cheryl and gave her the commitment last August that we would do this, and I repeat it again today, and I would just pay tribute to the campaign that she has led.
Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the Prime Minister was a pensioner earning $11,350 this year and receiving no winter fuel payment, what would he prioritise this Christmas? Heating or eating?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have to be clear why this decision is being made. A £22 billion black hole. And the previous government would walk past these tough decisions, pretend it wasn't there, put it in the long grass. We're not prepared to do that. Because we're taking tough decisions, we can commit to the triple lock, and that means that the state pension will increase by more than any loss of the winter payment allowance. But I would just say this, the biggest impact on pensioners in recent years was when they lost control of inflation, when they allowed energy prices to go through the roof, and we went through a cost of living crisis. We're stabilising the economy to make sure pensioners never, ever have to live through that again.
Mark Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Annabelle is 5 years old and lives in my constituency. She has high-risk neuroblastoma. Annabelle has endured 15 months of chemotherapy, high-dose chemotherapy, stem cell harvest, proton therapy, immunotherapy, hair loss, nasal feeding. Now she urgently needs the drug DFMO, not yet available in the UK. It must be administered within 90 days of the end of immunotherapy. 91 days is too late. Will the Prime Minister please meet with Annabelle's parents to discuss the life-saving care that she needs?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I pay tribute to Annabelle for her incredible bravery and understand how important it is that cancer patients are able to benefit from rapid access to effective new treatments. The manufacturers of this drug have applied for a UK licence through Project Orbis, which allows the rapid review and approval of new cancer treatments. And we'll ensure that that process is completed as quickly as possible. And I will also ensure that the Health Minister does set up the meeting that he's asked for.
Dame Harriet Ball.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thought that socialism was about taxing those with the broadest shoulders in order to help the most vulnerable. But it appears that Starmer socialism involves scaring those with the broadest shoulders out of the country by taking away the winter fuel allowance of frail 90-year-olds living in drafty homes. Will the Prime Minister apologise to my shivering constituents for his personal choice? And will he reverse this chilling decision?
My choice is to stabilise the economy after 14 years of failure. And I'll tell you for why. Because when a government loses control of the economy, it's working people who pay the price, and I will not let that happen under a Labour government.
Paulette Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. More than half of people with pancreatic cancer die within 3 months of diagnosis, and 7 in 10 people never even receive treatment. Every 2 minutes in the UK, someone is diagnosed with cancer. But for those diagnosed with the least survivable cancer, time has too often already run out. I'm really proud of the Labour government's commitment to our NHS, but will the Prime Minister now commit to reviewing a long-term cancer strategy so we can improve diagnosis and treatment rates in this country?
Prime Minister.
I thank her for raising this important issue, and it's obviously the second time it's been raised in this session. I'll have a lot more to say tomorrow when I deal with Lord Darcy's report. I pay tribute to her tireless campaigning, particularly in relation to pancreatic cancer. Cancer patients have been failed by the last government, waiting far too long for diagnosis and treatment. We'll get the NHS catching cancer on time, diagnosing it earlier and treating it faster, so more patients survive this horrible set of diseases.
Louis Fletch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Following Labour's disgraceful political decision to scrap winter fuel payments with little notice to millions of pensioners, will the Prime Minister today rule out scrapping concessionary travel fares and council tax discounts, which also help millions of pensioners across the UK? Yes or no?
Prime Minister.
Well, as he knows very well, I'm not going to preempt the budget. It will all be set out in due course.
Did it with the winter fuel.
Gareth Southgate.
Speaker, can I pass on the heartfelt thanks on behalf of the Bolton Council of Mosques, who greatly appreciated the dedication and leadership that the Prime Minister showed during the recent riots over the summer. Does my right honourable friend agree with me on the importance of supporting interfaith and community groups who play a vital role in bringing people together?
Minister.
Well, I thank her for raising that. And we owe an incredible debt of gratitude to our police for their courage in dealing with the recent disorders. And we took action to ensure they had the resources and powers they needed to tackle violence and restore order to our streets. We also, Mr. Speaker, provided additional security for mosques, ensuring freedom of worship and protection from racist threats. And in the aftermath, we saw communities who really represent Britain coming forward, led by faith groups and community organisations. They showed that unity and demonstrated our values of tolerance and of respect.
Anne Davies.
Diolch Llefarydd. Denmark has been undergrounding its electricity cables since 2008, building infrastructure and maintaining responsible stewardship of the countryside. The Welsh Labour government's policy is for all new power lines to be placed underground where possible. The UK Labour government favours overhead pylons. Why is his government opposing Welsh colleagues in Wales?
We are absolutely committed to the transition to renewable energy. The reason for that is because it gives us energy independence, it lowers the bills, and of course the next generation of jobs are tied up with it. We have to do it in a cost-effective way, and we'll make those decisions in the cost-effective way.
Jessica Morton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK steel industry needs a serious government which works in partnership with both businesses and trade unions to secure a a transition that's both right for the workforce and delivers economic growth in Wales. We know that deindustrialisation can be devastating to communities, so can the Prime Minister tell me how the government's safeguarding jobs and securing the future of steelmaking communities like ours for generations to come?
Prime Minister.
We're taking every step we can in relation to the steel industry because it's vital that we give it the support that it needs. We need steel in this country. We need steel made in this country. And our plans and our missions mean we're going to need more steel, not less. And it's the duty of the government to ensure jobs and communities and people aren't ignored in the transition and that jobs are protected. And Mr Speaker, I can say the Business Secretary will provide an update to the House this afternoon.
Olivia.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Oxfordshire has seen a huge amount of population growth in recent years without the infrastructure to match.
Why is that?
A new railway station on the Great Western Main Line between Didcot and Swindon, Grove and Wantage, would help to reduce traffic and improve access to both Oxford and London. Does the Prime Minister support investment in our railway, and would he meet with me to hear the case for a new railway station at Grove and Wantage?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable member for raising this important issue, obviously very important for his constituents. And we are committed to putting passengers at the heart of our railways. Great British Railways will work closely with regional government, mayors, operators and passenger groups to ensure rail investment meets the needs of communities. And I will ensure that he gets the meeting that he wants with a relevant minister to discuss the issues in his constituency.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. I'll let the front benches clear.
Well, let's just discuss what we've heard there in Prime Minister's questions. Here in the studio, I have a panel of MPs. We have, for the Conservatives, Helen Whately. For the Labour Party, we've got Dr Jeevan Sander. And for the Lib Dems, we've got Victoria Collins. Thanks all so much for joining us. But also here, we've got Sam Coates, our political editor. Sam, what did you make of PMQs? Just the second with Keir Starmer as the new leader.
There was a big theme, which was 4 different Conservatives used 7 different questions to raise the subject of the winter fuel allowance cut by Keir Starmer. Always good to see Tories defending welfare payouts. But although these exchanges weren't going to change the weather, I thought that Keir Starmer's answers and non-answers were quite telling. Rishi Sunak, leader of the opposition, now asked whether or not we could see the impact assessment. Who's it going to affect? Basically, Keir Starmer sidestepped that. But there is a difficult issue emerging that the government's answer to critics is to get people to claim pension.
We're going to come to our panel in a second, but first we're going back to the Commons. Jonathan Reynolds, the Business Secretary, is making a statement about steel.
This Labour government has secured for the workers of Tata Steel, specifically as it relates to their plant in Port Talbot. But as well as setting out the details of this improved deal, I'm also announcing today our ambition for a new UK-wide steel strategy, one which equips our steelmaking industry with the right support, not just to adapt, but to thrive in the new green economy. But before I do so, I want to address the situation we have inherited. Since becoming the Secretary of State 2 months ago, I've had to respond to a series of challenges, not just with the steel industry, but also in shipping, such as Harland and Wolff, and in other areas where the previous government had simply ceased to make decisions and decided to leave them for us to deal with. This was a dereliction of duty, and it has left the steel industry in particular in an extremely perilous position. The last government had been promising a plan for the steel industry for years. With what I'm able to announce today, with the signing of a legally binding deal that enables Tata to order their electric arc furnace as part of a significantly improved package, this government has made more progress in 2 months than they made over the last Parliament. But even if we had started these negotiations a year ago, never mind many years ago, as they had the opportunity to do, I have no doubt we would have secured an even better deal for the community. So I would like to start with an apology to the people of Port Talbot, because they were let down by the previous government. And whilst this deal is much improved, I acknowledge very much it falls short of what would be my ideal. However, I have been to Port Talbot several times. I've met the workforce there, the reps, the generations of families who have literally forged Port Talbot as we know it. And that's why when Tata first announced they would be closing the blast furnaces with some 2,800 job losses with them, I knew the workforce deserved so much better. I warned my predecessor not to proceed with what they had negotiated. Why? Because I was confident the government could secure a better deal for Tata's workers and a better deal for the people of Port Talbot. And Mr. Speaker, I'm able to announce today that this government has secured that better deal. Yeah. But I reiterate, had we had the opportunity that the previous government had over so many years, we could have done more. The key features are as follows. I can announce today that we've agreed a process with Tata to assess investment opportunities for new, additional capabilities that will deliver more secure, long-term jobs than the deal that we inherited. This is on top of the plans for the instalment of the electric arc furnace. We have agreed a process with Tata to take this forward, and I'll be able to report back to the House on this progress. But for me, this is the most important element. And I should therefore explain, Mr. Speaker, that the reason I'm announcing this deal now, rather than after this process is complete, is because in order for Tata to secure the build slot for the electric arc furnace, that element needs to be sorted now. Further delays would put the whole project at risk and could lead to a much, much worse outcome. Secondly, in every conversation I've had with Tata's directors, I've stressed the need to avoid compulsory redundancies wherever possible. I've asked them to channel their efforts instead into job matching and retraining so that the steelworkers of Port Talbot, who've dedicated so much to the industry in the past, can now help shape its future as they'll be able to transition and move within the business. But as well as that, Tata are agreeing to offer a comprehensive training programme for any employee as an alternative to those at risk of compulsory redundancy. This would be on full pay for 1 month and then £27,000 a year per employee for 11 months, and Tata will fund all of these costs. Employees will be able to choose from recognised qualifications to develop sought-after skills which will be in high demand in the local economy now and long into the future. We know too that Tata expects that during the construction of the electric arc furnace, at least 500 new jobs could be created, which will tap into the local labour market wherever possible. Thirdly, where we cannot secure new jobs or training, working closely with the unions, I can tell the House that we've helped to secure improved terms on redundancies. Tata's employees are now able to express an interest in the most generous voluntary redundancy package the company has ever offered for a restructuring of this size. Employees will now be paid 2.8 weeks of earnings for each year of service, up to a maximum of 25 years. At the same time, we're ensuring there's a minimum redundancy payment, £15,000 pro rata, and a retention payment of £5,000 for employees leaving the business because of these closures. And over 2,000 members of staff have expressed an interest in voluntary redundancy who will be eligible for these terms. Fourthly, as part of the deal, the company will also be releasing 385 acres of their site for sale or transfer. This is valuable real estate which will help bring in more companies and more employers, not just from the steel sector, but from a whole host of other industries too, helping to diversify the workforce at Port Talbot. While those on the opposition benches told us there was no alternative to what was originally proposed, we knew that there was, and we've bargained hard for it. And we're putting in watertight conditions within our grant funding agreement for job guarantees to claw back investment if these jobs do not materialise. For example, there is now an improved grant repayment of £40,000 for every job that is not retained post-transformation. This money will be repaid directly to the government and is a powerful incentive for Tata to deliver and meet the 5,000 UK jobs target. But, Mr. Speaker, our ambition for steel is so much bigger and broader than one single company. It is about the whole sector. The UK has always been a proud steelmaking nation with a rich heritage stretching back to the Industrial Revolution, from cars to cranes to ships and scaffolding. British steel has been and is still used the world over, embodying our industrial might and innovation. And yet for years, steel has been a neglected industry in this country. Crude steel production has declined by more than 50% in the last 10 years. Indeed, some proclaimed the industry's decline would be inevitable in the 21st century, that it was somehow a sunset industry. But, Mr. Speaker, those people are wrong. on this side of the House, we have never believed that decline is inevitable. And while the industry faces challenges today, we want to do everything we can to ensure that it can adapt and grow tomorrow. And that's why I'm pleased to announce that we will introduce our new steel strategy. As honourable members know, our manifesto included plans to make available £2.5 billion for steel, on top of the £500 million transformation of Port Talbot. And our intention is to increase our UK capabilities, something the previous government never attempted, so that we can create a more vibrant, competitive steel sector in the UK. As part of our steel strategy, this government will look seriously at options to improve steel capabilities across the supply chain, including in primary steelmaking. And we are also clear that we won't be able to prioritise short-term subsidies over long-term jobs. But that is why, with the help of independent experts, we will also be reviewing the viability of technologies for the production of primary steel, including possibly direct reduced iron. Steel is essential to delivering on our net zero goals and building the next generation of green infrastructure, which is something I know members of this government are passionate about. And that is why, as part of our steel strategy, we intend to use the new Procurement Act to drive economic growth and account for social value in the things the government buys and the projects we commission. This work is already underway to increase the role of steel as we build our manufacturing base. We also recognise that for far too long, British energy-intensive industries, including the steel sector, have been held back by high electricity costs. More often than not, this has made the UK less attractive to international investors, but we are going to take action. Our clean energy mission will ensure we are no longer exposed to the kind of gas price shocks we've seen in recent years, helping British businesses to compete and win in the global market. To support that ambition, we're also working with other like-minded nations to tackle global trade distortions, including through our chairing of the Global Forum on Steel Excess Capacity this year. Our steel strategy will be developed and delivered in partnership with the steel sector and the trade unions, and it will work in lockstep with the government's industrial strategy. Our ambition to ramp up investment, strengthen our supply chains, and create more well-paid jobs in the places where they're needed the most. To drive our partnership on the steel strategy forward, I will shortly meet with industry experts and interested parties to discuss the future of the industry, and we intend to publish the steel strategy in spring of next year. But, Mr. Speaker, this is a government that cares about steel and cares about the communities it supports and recognises its fundamental importance to the economy. And supporting steel in this country is involved in being involved in the detail, shepherding individual plants into the future while protecting the people within them. But it's also about providing a direction of travel, an inspiration for investment and a cause for confidence so that the sector can play its part in the next 10 years and beyond. We're not naive, Mr. Speaker, about the scale of the challenge before us. But while this is still challenging, I believe that this is both a better deal than that was on the table for Port Talbot and the maximum improvement that we could make in 2 months. It represents both a better destination and a better transition to the bright future that steel will have under this government. And I commend this statement to the House.
Prime Minister Gregson.
Thank you, that was Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds setting out a new deal for workers at Port Talbot, the redundancies that have been announced there. Let's cross to our correspondent Dan Whitehead, who's in Port Talbot and joins us now. Dan, what reaction to that improved deal, in inverted commas, that the Labour government say that they have managed to achieve?
Well, Tata Steel has long said that this steel works behind me here has been losing £1 million a day. It is simply unsustainable. And since Labour won the election, they have been here in Port Talbot, the Business Secretary, working with those unions, working with Tata Steel to try and secure a better deal. Let's get some instant reaction from the unions. Alan Davis is the national officer with the Community Union. You represent a lot of the workers in the plant here behind us. Alan, your reaction to this new deal?
It's not a day to celebrate. We're still losing a lot of jobs down here, but it's a significant improvement from where we were with the Tory government back in September.
We've heard there that there's an improvement on redundancy pay, but you were telling me that one of the big things is the future investment. There's no specifics yet from the government on exactly what that means. What do you read into that?
I think the future investment that we've been dealing with within the MOU that we've managed to negotiate with this Labour government will put significant strides forward to keeping steelmaking in Port Talbot and keeping the business alive across South Wales corridor.
The fact of the matter is that in a couple of weeks' time, the final blast furnace will still close here. Virgin steelmaking will end here in South Wales. Up to 2,800 people are still going to lose their jobs. Obviously, this is a better deal, and there is investment coming down the line. But that new electric arc furnace is not in place till 2028. There's going to be a lot of worried families here, aren't there?
There are a hell of a lot of worried families, and it's something that we're trying to deal with. We've got a training package in place that we managed to secure with the Labour government, and we're going to work through the details of that now and see how many people want to take that up, because that'll keep them with skin in the game, that if any jobs become available in the future, they'll be first place to take those jobs.
We understand some 2,100 workers here at Tata Steel have put themselves forward for the voluntary redundancy, but there's the supply chain issue, isn't there? Not just the 2,800 jobs going in South Wales, but many more thousands who are impacted.
You're 100% correct, and that's one thing that's overlooked by a lot of people. There are contractors in there that are on less terms and conditions for redundancy that are leaving with a pittance, and they're going to struggle to find other alternative work, and that's got to be our focus as well now.
Alan Davison from Community Union, thank you very much. We understand that the majority of those job losses, which are still going to happen, will take place by Christmas, and the rest of the redundancies by March next year.
OK, Dan, thanks very much. Good to get reaction to that straight away from Port Talbot. Well, also, just before that, of course, we had PMQs. With me now are the Shadow Secretary of State for Transport and the MP for Faversham and Mid-Kent, Helen Whately. Also, the Labour MP for Loughborough, Dr Jeevan Sander, and the Liberal Democrat MP for Harpenden and Berkhamsted, Victoria Collins. Thanks so much, and thanks for hanging on. Let's just talk about Port Talbot first before we get on to PMQs. Helen, the government says they've got a better deal than the Conservatives would have done. Is that true?
Well, I didn't hear very much about a better deal coming through there. I mean, what I did hear, as we had planned to do, is plans to support workers who aren't able to continue to work in the sector. It's very important, clearly, to support those workers who lose their jobs, retraining, for instance. And I am glad to see that Labour will be continuing to support the building of the new furnace, which is so important. We all know that the steel production has to modernise, and without the support that we put in place for that, 500 million committed when we were in government, we would see steelmaking potentially disappear altogether from Port Talbot. So I'm glad that that will continue. We're going to see the modernisation of the sector, support for workers going through a difficult time. But what I did also hear as part of the Secretary of State's statement was a lot of blaming us when we were in government. We heard the same in Prime Minister's questions from Keir Starmer. I think the fact is the government now needs to start taking responsibility for the decisions that they are making, for the decisions they made yesterday to take winter fuel allowance away from millions of pensioners, from the way that they are choosing to spend people's money, because these are choices that they're making and they do have to start taking responsibility.
Well, Dr Jeevan Sander, that's a fair point, isn't it? I mean, yes, you've only been in the job 2 months, but the decisions that are being made are the decisions made by this government, not the last government, especially the winter fuel payment removal.
Well, firstly, I want to pick up on something that Helen just said there, that she didn't hear why it was a better deal. I certainly heard the representative of those workers saying it was a better deal. We have been in government for 2 months' time. There is 14 years of mess to clear up around us. As everyone sees when they try to get a GP appointment, as everyone sees they struggle to pay their energy bills, there's a huge amount that we have to clear up. It's going to take us a long, long time to do so. We're open to that. We know that is the case. It's a difficult task before us, but we're here rolling up our sleeves. And as you've seen today from the Secretary of State, our plan to reform and indeed improve steelmaking in the future.
What about winter fuel payments, though? We saw a revolt by Labour MPs warning us about the impact on the elderly. We had Rachel Reeves wrapped up in an enormous scarf in the House of Commons, which has led to quite a lot of dialogue on social media. She's sending a subliminal message to pensioners that they need to put a scarf on this winter.
Well, our decisions to means test the winter fuel allowance will protect the poorest pensioners whilst also ensuring that we can fill in this £22 billion financing gap that we have been left. For the poorest pensioners, an increase in pensioner credit enrolment, already double we've seen in the past few weeks. On top of that, the Household Support Fund for those who just don't quite meet the threshold. And in the longer term, the Warm Homes Plan to insulate 5 million homes to ensure that everyone's, or those people who receive it, have lower energy bills in the future. For every single pension in this country, the state pension up by £900 in April, up by £460 in the April to come. GB Energy that gets bills down by hundreds of pounds. Our head is in making the right decisions to ensure that people are better off, and our heart is in doing so too, which is why the last time we were in government, we got down pensioner poverty by 900,000.
OK, let's bring in Victoria Collins, Lib Dem MP for Harpenden. And both of said you're shaking your head there.
I mean, I completely understand the economic mess, quite frankly, that was left by the last Conservative government. But we're talking about a time we have pensioners going into winter. I've been talking to local organisations that said we're talking about living on empty now for so many people. I've had constituents write to me, a couple who have just recovered from cancer, are considering that they will be going around on the bus to stay warm. But we also have charities such as Age UK saying that there'll be around 2 million in this country who will slip through those cracks and not be able to or choose between heating or eating. This is a really difficult time. This is not the right time. There are fairer ways to fund this difference right now. And while we're moving into winter, we have the most vulnerable in society. There are other ways. As Liberal Democrats, we've talked about reversing the tax cut that went to banks. We cannot do this to pensioners at this time.
Would you keep winter fuel payments for millionaire pensioners?
But the thing is, this rushed decision at this time is leaving people behind, and it is just not the right way to do that. There are other fairer ways at this moment, and we have to deal with it in a proper way, which doesn't leave the most vulnerable behind at a very difficult time when energy bills are going up and they are going to be struggling.
Helen, you're shaking your head to all of that, but what about those who would say, you know, that this was something that perhaps Rishi Sunak saw on the horizon, that these tough decisions were going to have to be made, and that was why he bailed out?
These are choices that this Labour government is making. They're choices of Keir Starmer, they're choices of Rachel Reeves. The choices they're making, and they are creating so much of what is being described as a black hole, through, for instance, their above-inflation pay rises to train drivers who we all know have far higher incomes than the pensioners that we're talking about. Their choice to do this GB Energy company, which is not going to bring down bills. There's no sign of that happening at all. So they're choosing to spend money in these ways and trying to blame it on us. As I say, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves should take responsibility for the decisions that they're making to take the winter fuel allowance away from millions of pensioners, 18,000 in my constituency. And I've had pensioners write to me about what this is going to mean for them. For instance, a pensioner who already chooses to only heat one room in their house and sleeps on the sofa during the winter in order to be warm enough. And that's with the support that we did put in place for pensioners, for instance, during the cost of living crisis, the extra payments we made to pensioners and the protections we put in place for the pension. There's one thing I just wanted to pick up on. Victoria said about pensioners going around on buses to keep warm. But however, what we just heard from Keir Starmer in PMQs was actually no commitment to keep the pensioners' bus pass. That's 4 times we've heard from the government the last 24 hours that pensioners' bus pass is under threat as well.
OK, we're going to have to leave it there. We are out of time, but thank you all very much for your patience and for staying on for so long after the announcement about steel. Helen Whately, Dr. Jeevan Sander and Victoria Collins, thank you all so very much. You are watching Sky News Today. We'll keep you there for 1 second. Coming up, Trump v Harris will bring you all the latest reaction to last night's presidential debate. Don't go anywhere.
It is 1 o'clock. This is Sky News Today, your headlines. We hear from Donald Trump following the first debate with Kamala Harris. He clears up his views on Taylor Swift's endorsement of his rival, and it's not a love story.
I was not a Taylor Swift fan. It was just a question of time.
The Prime Minister accused of hiding the impact of cuts to the winter fuel payment for some pensioners by Rishi Sunak. Steel deal. The government reveals its plans for the country's biggest plant and makes a promise to workers set to lose their jobs. Justice at last. A man jailed for life for the murder of a shopkeeper more than 30 years ago has his conviction quashed. And no regrets. Former England manager Gareth Southgate tells Sky News he stood down at the right time and is ready for a return to management.
I've got lots of opportunities. I'm very open-minded to what's next. That might be in football, that might be outside of football. I'm just going to take some time, refresh, recharge, and go from there.
Hello and good afternoon. Well, Donald Trump has been speaking following his head-to-head with Kamala Harris last night, their first debate ahead of the election. Now, early polls suggest approval ratings are up for Ms. Harris following the event, which saw her secure the support, afterwards, of Taylor Swift. Well, the former president made his views on Ms. Swift clear in the last few minutes. We'll bring you that in just a moment. But first, let's see more of the debate last night, which included comments about immigrants eating pets. Our US correspondent Mark Stone reports now from Philadelphia.
The ABC News presidential debate.
From the very first moment, Kamala Harris tried to own the stage.
Kamala Harris.
The handshake we had wondered about was forced on Donald Trump in his space and with an introduction to boot. Because this was the first time these two candidates for the presidency had ever come face to face. 90 minutes to present America with its choice. And from the off, blistering exchanges on an issue that could swing this election.
But her vice presidential pick says abortion in the 9th month is absolutely fine. He also says execution after birth. It's execution, no longer abortion, because the baby is born, is okay. And that's not okay with me.
First came the moderator's fact check.
There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born.
Then Harris's response, her core pitch to every woman in America.
And one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree. The government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body.
Harris's strategy was to get under Donald Trump's skin, and she certainly seemed to.
And I'm going to actually do something really unusual, and I'm going to invite you to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom.
People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go.
He then went where his advisors probably hoped he wouldn't.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
I just want to clarify, there have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals.
You talk about extreme.
It was the angry man his team were concerned would come out.
We have a nation that is dying, David.
But remember, that is the Donald Trump the locked-in supporters love. The question is how the undecideds respond to this. The focus then shifted to the vice president. What does she really stand for?
I know you say that your values have not changed, so then why have so many of your policy positions changed?
My values have not changed. And what is important is that there is a president who actually brings values and a perspective that is about lifting people up and not beating people down and name-calling.
If one criticism was that they gave Donald Trump the last word many times, another is that to straight questions, Kamala Harris's answers were often less than direct. There were jugular moments.
Wait a minute, I'm talking now, if you don't mind, please. Does that sound familiar?
As Donald Trump harnessed her flip-flopping for voters still trying to work out what Kamala Harris really stands for.
because she has no policy. Everything that she believed 3 years ago and 4 years ago is out the window. She's going to my philosophy now. In fact, I was going to send her a MAGA hat.
In a fast-moving debate, there was doubling back to correct the record.
This business about taking everyone's guns away, Tim Walz and I are both gun owners. We're not taking anybody's guns away, so stop with the continuous lying about this stuff.
On foreign policy, Trump latched on to the many across the country who attached the wars in Ukraine and Gaza to an inept Biden. But Harris turned it on him.
That these dictators and autocrats are rooting for you to be president again because they're so clear they can manipulate you with flattery and favors. And that is why so many military leaders who you have worked with have told me you are a disgrace.
Do you want Ukraine to win this war?
I want the war to stop. I want to save lives.
Trump took nearly an hour and a half to get to the point which might sway the undecideds.
She is Biden. You know, she's trying to get away from Biden. I don't know the gentleman, she says. She is Biden.
Clearly, I am not Joe Biden, and I am certainly not Donald Trump. And what I do offer is a new generation of leadership for our country.
And then from the debate to the spin room and the surrogates doing their principals' work.
I thought Kamala Harris had a great night, and I think she showed Donald Trump to be a rambling, confused man who was focused on dividing us as opposed to bringing people together.
Surely you wanted to come here and say that Donald Trump had a great night.
I think he had a fine night. I think that this was a night that was absolutely necessary, and I am so happy we finally got to see these two people on a stage.
Well, remarkably, Donald Trump has now turned up here in the spin room himself. When you come to deliver your own top spin, it doesn't suggest it was quite the night you wanted.
Why did you say that people are eating dogs in Springfield, Ohio?
True, you take a look at it. No,
it's nonsense. The local authorities say it is.
You could check it out. Check with the authorities.
In 8 weeks, America will choose from two such starkly different candidates. Mark Stone, Sky News in Philadelphia.
Well, that was last night. Let's take you now to New York City, where in the last few moments, former President Donald Trump has arrived at the 23rd anniversary memorial event for those 9/11 attacks. We're expecting as well to see current President Joe Biden as well as the Vice President Kamala Harris. But you can see there former President Donald Trump alongside his running mate J.D. Vance, and in the front of the shot just a second, stepping out there was Mike Bloomberg, former mayor of New York. This is the scene here at Ground Zero, the memorial for 9/11, 23 years on from those terror attacks when nearly 3,000 people killed in New York City at the World Trade Center after hijacked planes were flown into the towers, as well as at the Pentagon and in Pennsylvania. The event gets underway proper at 8:46, the moment that the first plane struck one of the towers. Now, prior to his arrival in New York, Donald Trump spoke to Fox and Friends, the morning show, and blamed the format for painting him, as he said, in a poor light.
I won the debate, according to C-SPAN, by a lot. According to every single, I think we had 14 polls that we sent to you. Everyone had me winning. We had a terrible network. I think they were terrible. They should be embarrassed. I mean, they kept correcting me, and what I said was largely right, or I hope it was right. But what they said was absolutely wrong. The other, what she said, and they refused to correct. I even complained a couple of times. Why aren't you correcting them?
Now, after the two candidates stepped off stage last night, there was a major endorsement online for Kamala Harris, with Taylor Swift taking to Instagram to pledge her support. Now, she wrote in the post, like many of you, I watched the debate tonight. If you haven't already, now is a great time to do your research on the issues at hand and the stances these candidates take on the topics that matter to you the most. As a voter, I make sure to watch and read everything I can about their proposed policies and plans for the country. She goes on, I'll be casting my vote for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in the 2024 presidential election. I'm voting for Kamala Harris because she fights for the rights and causes I believe need a warrior to champion them. I was so heartened and impressed by her selection of running mate Tim Maltz, who's been standing up for LGBTQ+ rights, IVF and a woman's right to her own body for decades. Well, as we've heard, Trump was asked about his opinion on that endorsement by Taylor Swift of his opponent.
I actually like Mrs. Mahomes much better, if you want to know the truth. She's a big Trump fan. I was not a Taylor Swift fan. It was just a question of time. You couldn't possibly endorse Biden. You look at Biden, you couldn't possibly endorse him. But she's a very liberal person. She seems to always endorse a Democrat, and she'll probably pay a price for it in the marketplace. But no, I like Brittany. I think Brittany's great. Brittany got a lot of news last week. She's a big MAGA fan. That's the one I like much better than Taylor Swift.
Brittany Mahomes, of course, the wife of Patrick Mahomes, who also plays for the Kansas City Chiefs, which is the same team that Travis Kelce plays for, who's the boyfriend of Taylor Swift. So now you know why he said that. Now, here, and the Prime Minister has been accused of hiding the impact of winter fuel cuts by Rishi Sunak this lunchtime. Let's take a listen to some of PMQs.
When I was in government, I delivered record increases in the state pension. We protected the winter fuel payment and we gave pensioners cost of living benefits. He's the one that's taking money away from pensioners on £13,000, Mr. Speaker. But this has got nothing to do with the public finances. His own Chancellor just this morning, his MPs may not have been listening to her, his own Chancellor this morning admitted that she would prefer it if this policy didn't even raise any money, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, the government would not have made this decision without an impact analysis. And yesterday, the Energy Minister confirmed that. So I ask, very simply again, why won't he publish the assessment now?
Mr. Speaker, I remember the days when the Conservative Party was to be concerned about balancing the books. They've left a £22 billion black hole. Responsibility for this decision lies there.
Let's bring our political correspondent Serena Buxing for more of this. Afternoon to you, Serena. So look, as expected, I guess, they talked all about the cuts to these winter fuel payments for some pensioners.
Yes, exactly. It's a big theme, dominating as we knew it would. 7 different questions from Conservatives about the cutting of the winter fuel payments. Rishi Sunak sort of went in quite hard, reminiscent of those debates that we saw in general election, to be honest, on this impact assessment. And that's because the last time Labour did an assessment on this, again, it was under a different administration, 2017, when the Tories were actually means testing it. They came out with a figure that 4,000 pensioners could potentially die over this. Now, today, the current minister said this was under a different policy where the triple lock wasn't taken into account, but still it leaves them open to the fact that they have potentially not assessed the impact of this, or if they have, they haven't been open about it. So that's what Rishi Sunak was talking about. We know that some Labour MPs abstained as well, some to show their disagreement with the government. We understand that those who didn't have a valid excuse could potentially be punished in some way. We don't know what that will look like yet. But ultimately, the public don't like divided parties, and the government did win this vote. So the lasting message from PMQs today is that there is some dissent over this and potentially an unpopular policy.
Interesting. All right, Serena, for now, thanks for that. Now, the government has announced a multi-million-pound package to help the transition to greener steel production in South Wales. Tata Steel is planning to change the way it produces steel at its plant in Port Talbot, with a loss potentially of up to 2,800 jobs. Now, it's expected the new funding will improve the terms of voluntary redundancies, and it's reported that people will be offered the chance to retrain for new jobs. Well, earlier, the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, made a statement in the House.
Working closely with the unions, I can tell the House that we've helped to secure improved terms on redundancies. Tata's employees are now able to express an interest in the most generous voluntary redundancy package the company has ever offered for a restructuring of this size. We're ensuring there's a minimum redundancy payment, £15,000 pro rata, and a retention payment of £5,000 for employees leaving the business because of these closures. And over 2,000 members of staff have expressed an interest in voluntary redundancy who will be eligible for these terms.
Well, our Wales correspondent Dan Whitehead joins us now from Port Talbot with more on this. Dan, afternoon to you. So, look, I guess this was expected. Was it? How's it been received in the community?
The unions have welcomed the talks with the new Labour government. They say this is not a day to celebrate. The fact of the matter is those jobs are still going to be lost, and the last blast furnace here at the Talbot Steelworks will close by the end of this month, in the next couple of weeks, bringing an end to the history of virgin steel making here in South Wales. This is happening, of course, because they're going to be switching to an electric arc furnace, but that's not going to be up and running until 2028. The government really announcing today tweaks to the redundancy packages and retraining. So we heard from the business secretary there that those people who are facing redundancy will get 2.8 weeks of earnings for each full year, up to 25 years. There's quite a significant training package. Well, Tata Steel will pay workers a month's full pay and then £27,000 per year for 11 months to help retrain as those workers try to find new jobs. There's words as well, pretty vague from the government, on future investments, working with Tata Steel on further investments. Of course, the new Labour government is still investing £500 million. That was a pledge under the Tories into this new arc furnace. They're going in there with Tata Steel to create a £1.25 billion investment for that electric furnace. And the government also finally announcing a steel strategy in the spring next year, not just to do with South Wales steel production, but across the UK. The fact of the matter is that in this town, nearly 3,000 people are facing redundancy, and that has a huge impact not only on those families but the wider supply chain as well. And over the last couple of weeks we've been here in Port Talbot spending time with those steel workers who are having to retrain and look for jobs. This is what they've been telling us.
Well, the storm's going to come, to be honest, though. It is worrying times for us all here.
Jeff's been a taxi driver in Port Talbot for 20 years. With thousands of steelworkers losing their jobs in the next few weeks, work for him is drying up.
We get a lot of calls from the train station, bringing them into Tata from the ships, so they are gone already, so there's less work already. There's not 3,000 jobs in Port Talbot going to pay what Tata Steel employees are on. So what are they going to do? There's nothing for them here now. I can't see nothing other than Port Talbot becoming a ghost town.
The final blast furnace will shut down here by the end of this month. That means up to 2,800 workers are now on the hunt for jobs elsewhere. From steel to steam, 28-year-old Cassius is serving up something new. Unsure about his future at the steelworks, he's opened a coffee shop in town.
A couple of months in, it's been a brilliant turnout. It's been all organic with it all, and people are just turning up. We just got to keep positive and, you know, hope that there'll be other opportunities in this closure.
Tata Steel says Port Talbot is losing £1 million a day. The iron and steel works are being mothballed or decommissioned entirely, ahead of more than a £1 billion investment to go electric. The last ship bringing in raw material to make steel here at Port Talbot has now been and gone. A significant moment in the plant's 120-year history. New jobs may come with the greener electric arc furnace, but that won't be ready here until 2028. Too long to wait for some. 50 miles from Port Talbot, Pro Steel Engineering is one of 50 companies taking on workers like Steve.
I just went out then and got in contact with people I had worked with before or find out where the work was. A lot of the skilled workers are going to find it hard to try and match the money that they were earning down there. Yes.
Companies like this need workers like Steve to stay in the area.
It's vastly important that within Wales we maintain this high-skilled manufacturing base. You know, there's a huge capability here at the moment, and if we're not careful, we'll lose it, and if we lose it, we'll lose it for good.
The government is planning to publish a new strategy for the future of steelmaking in the UK next spring, insisting there is a bright future for the industry. But with most job losses expected by this Christmas, for thousands, the future does not feel bright. Dan Whitehead, Sky News, in Port Talbot, South Wales.
OK, you're watching Sky News Today, and still to come. A conviction quashed. A man who was jailed for life for murder is told the case against him was unsafe. And the latest on the war in Ukraine with top diplomats, the Foreign Secretary and the US Secretary of State in Kyiv for talks with President Zelensky.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
I'm Adam Parsons. I'm Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
More flares going off, a volley of rocks. Cobbles have been pulled up out and are being used as missiles to hurl at these police.
We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
We have now left Italy and entered France. Nobody's asked to check our identity.
Made by people who dare to challenge.
Nice to see you again, Mr. Barnier. Why? Meeting you.
Fishing does have the potential to stymie an enormous economic deal. What strikes you when you come to this glacier is not just the way in which the environment is changing, but the speed at which those changes are happening.
It's devastating, actually.
Welcome back. Now, Oliver Campbell, who was jailed for life for the murder of a shopkeeper in 1991, has had his conviction quashed by the Court of Appeal. Well, let's bring in our correspondent, Saba Chowdhury, following this for us. Afternoon to you, Saba. So what's the court heard?
Good afternoon. Well, this a murder case, a judgment, firstly, that goes back all the way to 1990. And today, the court heard that the murder conviction has been totally quashed by the Court of Appeal. It concerns a man called Oliver Campbell, a 53-year-old individual with learning difficulties who was convicted as a teenager of the murder of a man called Baldev Hundal in 1991. There he is on screen. Baldev was shot in the back of his head in his East London off-licence. Now, at the time, Oliver Campbell confessed to the shooting, and he subsequently served 11 years in prison and then was released on licence. However, since then, he has maintained that he is innocent, arguing that he was interviewed by police at the time without a solicitor present there to advise him. He also said that his confession was made under police pressure and under duress, is what he told Sky News. His lawyers have also claimed that jurors were misled at the time of trial and did not know the full extent of Campbell's mental health issues, and claim they did not hear, this is jurors, that another man had been named as the gunman. Now, this ultimately is good news for Campbell's family. He's been fighting for this for the past 22 years now, but not such good.
All right, I'm just going to interrupt you for a moment there, Savile. We can see we're going back to the House of Commons. The Northern Ireland Secretary, Hilary Benn, on his feet to make a statement regarding the murder of a lawyer in Belfast after a 35-year campaign. Let's listen to him.
Patrick Finucane. Judge Corey also recommended that the Irish government establish a tribunal of inquiry into the deaths of former RUC officers Bob Buchanan and Harry Breen. Inquiries were promptly established in all of these cases, with one exception: the death of Mr. Finucane. Meanwhile, in 2003, the third investigation by Sir John Stevens into alleged collusion between the security forces and loyalist paramilitaries had concluded that there had been state collusion in Mr. Finucane's killing. That investigation was followed by the conviction in 2004 of one of those responsible, Ken Barrett. With criminal proceedings concluded, the then Northern Ireland Secretary, Paul Murphy, made a statement to Parliament setting out the government's commitment to establish an inquiry. But despite a number of attempts, the government was unable to reach agreement with the Finucane family on arrangements for one. In 2011, the coalition government decided against an inquiry. Instead, a review of what had happened, led by Sir Desmond de Silva QC, was established. Sir Desmond concluded that he was left, and I quote, "in no doubt that agents of the state were involved in carrying out serious violations of human rights up to and including murder." The publication of his findings in 2012 led the then Prime Minister, David Cameron, to make an unprecedented apology from this dispatch box to the Finucane family on behalf of the British government, citing the, and I quote, "shocking levels of state collusion," end of quote, in this case. In 2019, the Supreme Court found that all the previous investigations had been insufficient to enable the state to discharge its obligations under Article 2 of the European Convention on Human Rights. The court identified a number of deficiencies in the state's compliance with Article 2. In particular, Sir Desmond's review did not have the power to compel the attendance of witnesses. Those who met Sir Desmond were not subject to testing as to the accuracy of their evidence, and a potentially critical witness was excused from attendance. In November 2020, the then Secretary of State for Northern Ireland announced that he would not be establishing a public inquiry at that time, pending the outcome of continuing investigations. But that decision was quashed by the Northern Ireland High Court in December 2022. Mr. Speaker, this government takes its human rights obligations and its responsibilities to victims and survivors of the Troubles extremely seriously. And the plain fact is that 2 decades on, the commitment made by the government, first in the agreement with the Irish government and then to this House to establish an inquiry into the death of Mr. Finucane, remains unfulfilled. It is for this exceptional reason that I have decided to establish an independent inquiry into the death of Patrick Finucane under the 2005 Inquiries Act. I have, of course, met Mrs. Finucane and her family, first on the 25th of July to hear their views, and again yesterday to inform them of my decision. Mrs. Finucane asked the government to set up a public inquiry under the 2005 Act, and as I've just told the House, the government has now agreed to do that in line with both the 2019 Supreme Court ruling and the Court of Appeal judgment in July this year. In making this decision, I have, as is required, considered the likely costs and impact on the public finances. It is the government's expectation that the inquiry will, while doing everything that is required to discharge the state's human rights obligations, avoid unnecessary costs given all the previous reviews and investigations and the large amount of information and material that is already in the public domain. Indeed, in the most recent High Court proceedings, the judge suggested that an inquiry could, and I quote, build on the significant investigative foundations which are already in place. Mr. Speaker, as part of my decision-making process, I did also consider whether to refer this case to the Independent Commission for Reconciliation and Information Recovery. The Commission has powers comparable to those provided by the Inquiries Act to compel witnesses and to secure the disclosure of relevant documents by state bodies, powers identified by the Supreme Court as being crucial for the government to discharge its human rights obligations. The Commission was found in separate proceedings in February this year by the High Court to be sufficiently independent and capable of conducting Article 2 compliant investigations. And while I am committed to considering measures to further strengthen the Commission, I have every confidence in its ability under the leadership of Sir Declan Morgan to find answers for survivors and families. However, given the unique circumstances of this case and the solemn commitment made by the government in 2001 and again in 2004, the only appropriate way forward is to establish a public inquiry. Mr. Speaker, many of us in this House remember the savage brutality of the Troubles, a truly terrible time in our history, and we must never forget that most of the deaths and injuries were the responsibility of paramilitaries, including the Ulster Defence Association, the Provisional IRA and others. And we should also always pay tribute to the work during that time of the armed forces, the police, the security services, the vast majority of whom served with distinction and honour, and so many of whom sacrificed their lives in protecting others. It is very hard for any of us to understand fully the trauma of those who lost loved ones, sons and daughters, spouses and partners, fathers and mothers, and what they have been through. And there is, of course, nothing that any of us can do to bring them back or to erase the deep pain that was caused. But what we can do is to seek transparency, to help provide answers to families, and to work together for a better future for Northern Ireland, which has made so much progress since these terrible events. I hope that this inquiry will finally provide the information that the Finucane family has sought for so long. The government will seek to appoint a chair of the inquiry and establish its terms of reference as soon as possible, and I will update the House further. Mr. Speaker, I commend this statement to the House.
Right, we come to the Shadow Secretary of State, Olivia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Well, that was Hilary Benn, the Northern Ireland Secretary, announcing an independent public inquiry into the murder of the lawyer Pat Finucane, who was shot dead in 1989 by loyalist terrorists. Let's bring in our senior Ireland correspondent, David Blevins, for more on this. David, great to have you with us. Look, I suppose first of all, it's worth sort of remembering how much of a moment this killing of Mr. Finucane was in 1989.
Well, this is a defining day. The Finucane family have waited 35 years for this moment. It was February 1989 when Pat Finucane, a prominent Belfast lawyer, was murdered, shot 14 times in front of his wife and 3 children as they were eating a meal in their Belfast home. He had come to prominence as a very effective defence solicitor representing IRA members and indeed loyalist paramilitaries. But his killing became one of the most notorious of the period of time we refer to as the Northern Ireland Troubles, because it shone a light on what is often described as the dirty war, the murky business of collusion between loyalist terrorists and state forces. There were a number of investigations, one carried out by a former Metropolitan Police Commissioner, another by a former Canadian judge, another by a former UN war crimes prosecutor, all concluding that there had been a degree of collusion in this case, prompting the then Prime Minister David Cameron to apologise for shocking levels of collusion. But the government until now had reneged on its commitment to call a public inquiry.
OK, David, for now, in Belfast, thank you for that. A public inquiry into the murder of Pat Finucane has been announced by the Northern Ireland Secretary. Let's take you back now live to New York City, where the memorial, 23 years since the 9/11 attacks, is underway. You can see there dignitaries in attendance from right to left. J.D. Vance, the vice presidential nominee, former President Donald Trump, Mayor Mike Bloomberg, current President Joe Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, and the leader of the Senate for the Democrat side, Mr. Chuck Schumer. There is going to be at 8:46, New York time, so of course 1:46, here a moment of silence to mark the moment 23 years ago that the first plane struck the towers of the World Trade Center. That attack, which killed nearly 3,000 people in New York City, at the Pentagon, where another plane that was hijacked was flown into, and also a field in Pennsylvania where a hijacked plane was taken down by those on board. The ceremony, as I say, gets underway proper at 8:46, the commemoration, and there's going to be a citywide moment of silence at that moment to mark when Flight 11 struck the North Tower. Now, while we keep an eye on these pictures in New York City and prepare for that moment at 8:46, let's just reflect on last night's presidential debate. We see two of the combatants there, and we can speak to Chris Jackson, Senior Vice President and Public Polling Lead at Ipsos in the United States, to get his thoughts on what we saw last night and what it may or may not have done to the polls. Chris, great to have you with us. Thanks for making the time. Has there been any snap polling after last night's debate, and what's it telling us?
Greetings. It's great to be with you today. There are a number of snap polls that are underway, but none have been published yet. No major ones, at least, have been published yet. But there have been a number of qualitative pieces of information that have come back, focus groups, things like that. And just about all of them suggest that Kamala Harris had won the debate, had a more sort of dominant performance, but Trump didn't really damage himself with his supporters that much. So Harris won. Trump maybe lost a little bit of ground, but probably isn't going to cost him in the polls.
So Kamala won, but Trump didn't really lose that badly. So we've already heard that there's talk of another debate. Why do you think that Kamala would want to do that? Is it still the case that we hear from the reporting that the American public still feel like they don't know her well enough?
So there is certainly a chunk of the American public that is still getting to know Harris. And I think for her, the debates serve a function of dominating news cycles, keeping the campaigns focused on her as a winner, focused on the issues she wants to be talking about, which is just generally the objective of both campaigns for the remaining 2 months before the election. So it may not necessarily be about winning supporters over so much as keeping her base excited and winning those news cycles.
And it's right, isn't it, Chris? And you can sort of tell viewers who aren't paying that much attention to this election cycle that it's just going to be a couple of states, a few states and a few thousand voters that decide this. Just how tight is the polling in those swing states? Let's start with Pennsylvania.
That's right, yeah. So it's a national election, of course, but because of the peculiarities of our electoral college system, it does come down to a couple of closely divided states. Pennsylvania is one of the largest, one of the most important for that. And the polling right now is honestly all over the place. Some show Harris up by a small margin, some show Trump up by a small margin. It really is a coin flip, and it's going to come down to which side is more energized, more motivated, and shows up on Election Day.
Right, and in terms of trying to get out the vote in somewhere like Pennsylvania, I mean, what is being done by the various camps at the moment? I know that they're passing through there on a very regular basis. I think that Kamala Harris begins her bus tour, and the second stop on that tour is going to be Pennsylvania again.
That's right. So there's, of course, the candidates themselves doing lots of appearances in Pennsylvania and the other swing states, trying to get excitement up with their supporters. But that's just the top level of a very large and expansive organization, trying to mobilize voters, having people going door to door, contacting potential voters, arranging for transportation to voting locations on Election Day, all of these various things to help encourage your side, your supporters to get out and vote on Election Day.
OK, Chris, look, while you're with us, we're just looking at pictures of New York City at Ground Zero, where the commemorations to mark 23 years since the 9/11 attack will get underway proper in just a few minutes' time, just to let viewers know what we're seeing as we're talking about the debate. Chris, give us a broader sense of the American electorate at the moment. We talk about people being energised. Just how energised are Americans right now about this election?
So it does look like Americans are pretty tuned in, pretty fired up about the election. The 2020 election was the largest turnout, largest number of voters in American history. And it does look like we might be on pace to surpass that this year, partially because there's a larger population, but also there's a lot of enthusiasm. And I think one of the key things that we're waiting for is to see what the ratings for last night's debate was, how many people tuned in. The Clinton-Trump debate in 2016 had almost 90 million viewers. So if we see more than that for last night, I think that'll suggest a big election turnout in November.
I mean, of course, America has a huge population, some 330 million, but I guess 90 million tuning in would be a huge number. And it was a television event. I mean, you will have watched along as well, Chris. Do you have the sense that it was that big event that it was touted as before?
I think it was. I think it was a major event. I think a lot of people tuned in. We certainly saw sort of the foremost cultural figure in America today. Taylor Swift was watching, and she put an endorsement in for Harris immediately after the debate. So I do think it was a major moment. And I think, again, the big question is going to be, was it something that was maybe 60, 70 million viewers, and it's a quarter of the population, or 90, maybe even 100 million viewers, something approaching the Super Bowl, which is the largest televised event every year in American society, and it's closer to maybe even half of Americans who tuned in.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Taylor Swift, Chris. I do want to ask you about that endorsement. 200 million or so followers on Instagram. I'm not sure what she has on the other social media apps. As a pollster, do you have to factor that kind of star power endorsement into a candidate's potential numbers?
We don't factor it in directly. There's not a Taylor Swift adjustment in the poll, but it will likely have a little bit of an impact. Harris has been really focusing on trying to shore up her support with younger voters. It's a constituency that has historically voted Democratic, but Biden was struggling with them earlier this year. She's made some inroads with them, but I feel like this Swift endorsement is going to definitely help her in that regard, help her get people motivated. And Taylor has a number of concerts in Florida, which isn't necessarily a swing state, but is marginal. In the weeks right before the election, definitely going to be an opportunity to get out potential Harris voters in that state.
That's really interesting. So you're actually thinking about the fact that Taylor's going to be in Florida, of course, the state where Donald Trump has his summer home, should we call it, the Winter White House, and that could impact some of the voting, do you think?
That's right. Well, each one of these Taylor Swift shows, has up to 100 million people attending it. That's more than the margin of difference in several of these swing states in the 2020 election. So, yes, I think it potentially could have an impact, though, again, probably small, probably on the margins. But in an election where it's going to be this closely divided, every little thing is going to matter.
100,000, not 100 million attending, that would be some show, wouldn't it? It's about
that would be
100,000
quite the show, yeah.
Just finally then, conversely, the fact that Donald Trump has sort of rejected it as well, what does that do to his numbers, do you think? Rejected Taylor Swift's endorsement?
I think Trump's support base is actually very resilient, very dedicated to him. It probably doesn't damage him very much. Really, it's more about Harris's upside at the moment. How much support can Harris sort of grow or gain? Trump is probably locked in about 47, 48% of the votes. That really seems to be where he performs in election after election. And the real question is going to be, does Harris outperform that or underperform that come Election Day?
All right. Chris Jackson from Ipsos in the United States. Really appreciate your expertise, Chris. Thanks for being with us.
Great to be with you.
Now, the Foreign Secretary David Lammy and the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken are in Ukraine for talks with President Volodymyr Zelensky. Well, here they are, arriving by train in Kyiv just a little earlier. They're expected to hold talks as well with the Ukrainian Foreign Minister. Now, for more on this, let's bring in our International Affairs Editor, Dominic Waghorn. Dom, afternoon to you. So, look, they told us yesterday in that news conference they were going, where you were there. I mean, what's the sense of what they will be able to get done while in Kyiv?
Yeah, they did, and that was a surprise, actually, because normally you only find out they're there when they're there. So it was interesting that we were told ahead of time. It's a historic visit, because it's the first time two of, well, Britain and America's top diplomats have travelled together to Kyiv for a decade, and I think it shows a kind of combined sense of urgency. And they both said it was a critical moment in the war yesterday, and that's for two reasons. One is that the situation on the ground, in a military sense, in the east of Ukraine is moving against Ukraine. Russia is closing in on Pokrovsk, which is a key transport hub. If they lose that, the Ukrainians, they could then lose the Donetsk region entirely, which is one of the main war aims that Putin has made very clear he wants to achieve. So if he can do that by winter, that will be a major blow for the Ukrainians and also for Joe Biden, who's invested so much in helping the Ukrainians. But the other thing is the movement of ballistic missiles from Iran to Russia. And that's a sort of game-changing moment the Ukrainians have been dreading, because they're getting pummeled by Russian armaments, by these missiles the Russians are using, and the drones, of course, that the Ukrainians have been using, the Russians have been using, supplied by the Iranians. But ballistic missiles from Iran allow them to obviously hit Ukrainian cities and things like the power grid, but also allows the Russians to use the hypersonic missiles that are longer range and harder to intercept with more freedom. So it's a double blow for the Ukrainians. And so what we're expecting the Ukrainians to say to the Americans and the British is, these long-range weapons you've given us, Western-supplied weapons, that you're not allowing us to hit deeper into Russia. You've got to change those rules of engagement so we can strike them. And we got a sense yesterday that there is movement on that front. We'll have to see what that leads to.
Yeah, well, they did announce those sanctions on Iran for the use of
They did, fairly limited sanctions, which I think leads us to believe that there's more to come, and that may well be a change in those rules.
All right, Dom, thanks for that. The viewers, we're looking at the room where those diplomats will be meeting later, and of course, Dom will be here and we'll bring you anything that we get from that meeting, the UK Foreign Secretary and the US Secretary of State in Kyiv for talks throughout the afternoon. Right, you're watching Sky News Today, still to come. No regrets. Former England manager Gareth Southgate on his future in football. We heard from him just a little earlier.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
I'm Adam Parsons. I'm Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. More flares going off, a volley of rocks. Cobbles have been pulled up out and are being used as missiles to hurl at these police. We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. We have now left Italy and entered France. Nobody's asked to check our identity. Made by people who dare to challenge. Nice to see you again, Mr. Barnier. Why? Meeting you. Fishing does have the potential to stymie an enormous economic deal. What strikes you when you come to this glacier is not just the way in which the environment is changing, but the speed at which those changes are happening.
It's devastating, actually.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win. Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
Emirates premium economy. Maybe one day all airlines will have seats like this. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Welcome back. Now, the former England manager, Gareth Southgate, has told Sky News he has no regrets stepping down after 8 years in the job following the loss to Spain in the final of those European Championships. Well, speaking earlier, Southgate said he'd had an incredible journey and didn't rule out a return to club management.
Oh, look, I mean, I had an incredible 8-year journey with the team. It was an absolute privilege to be manager of my country, work with brilliant players, fantastic staff. So, yeah, look, we wanted to do that final piece. We achieved so much across that period, and to have finished it by winning the final would have been perfection. But it wasn't to be, but I'm sure the team can now go on and be successful over the next few years.
I mean, was it your game plan always to resign if you didn't make it at the Euros?
Well, I thought about a lot of things. I think it was probably the right time for change. I think what you see now is that bit of hope that change can bring. And, you know, I'm completely content with that. 8 years is a long time in the role. I'm looking forward to different challenges ahead now. And I have to say, I'm enjoying the rest.
It must be tinged with regret, though. I mean, 102 games, 62 victories, which is fantastic, but denied glory right at the end. Do you now look back, and it's only been a couple of months, but do you now reflect and think you could have done things differently? Would you have done things differently if you had the chance to go back?
I don't think you can have regrets. You know, we made decisions that, with the information we had at the time, to try and produce a winning team. We went to a first final in 60 years. We went to another final, the first we've ever been to away from England. So we made huge progress. Of course, as a professional, you want to win, and ultimately some people will judge you purely on that. But we also had some incredible nights. I think we've taken the team, the consistency. We're ready to compete in every tournament, and you know, I'm hugely proud of that progress. As a leader, you have to look at where you picked it up and where you leave it.
And when you look at Lee Carsley, who's taken over in the interim, he's got a different strategy to you, it seems. He's faced a lot of criticism himself, for example, over you know, his stance on the national anthem. Is this part of what makes the job really hard, the noise that surrounds the job as well as the job itself?
Yeah, I think that's pretty apparent to anybody that lives in this country. You know what the role of England manager entails. I always knew, I saw my predecessors go through all of that, so I was under no illusions. I saw the very best of it, and I saw some difficult times, and in terms of a life experience, that was very special.
How do you block it out? Because a lot of it was really personal to you and pretty cruel.
I think as you get experienced and you're in that position for the length of time I was, you're able to filter out what's important, what helps you in terms of the job. You have to take decisions that at times will be unpopular, but you're doing those, making those decisions with all of the information that not everybody sees the players on the training pitch, their physical condition. And if you're affected by that noise in terms of your decisions, then you'll go down a dangerous route.
So what's next for you? Retirement in inverted commas. You've got a new role in UEFA as a technical observer. Any thoughts about going back to club football?
Well, the role with UEFA is something I've done for 6 or 7 years, and it's not a full-time role in any way. But I think that in terms of, sorry, I think It's okay. But no, I've got lots of opportunities. I'm very open-minded to what's next. That might be in football, that might be outside of football. I'm just going to take some time, refresh, recharge, and go from there.
Would you, I mean, you must have had approaches, though, about the Premier League. Have you had some conversations?
No, I think at the moment people know that I need to get some energy back. I'm intent on enjoying my life. I'm not going to rush into anything. I want to make sure that I make good decisions. And as I say, there's lots of different experiences that I'm enjoying, a bit like today. Got some charities that I want to support, which are very important to me. But also there's, as I said, opportunities outside of football as well that I'm also quite interested in.
What are your feelings about the amount of football that a lot of the young players that we're seeing coming up through the teams are playing? You know, there seems to be a lot of demands on young players, quite a lot of concerns about whether they're being pushing too hard. Do you think the teams are doing enough to protect their players at the minute?
Look, I think the football calendar is something that everybody's very conscious of. The demands are high and the rewards are high, so there's a balance there. As always, nobody's putting their hands up for less money in terms of playing, so that comes at a cost, and I think there does need to be a central conversation about the calendar, but yeah, there are other people that are going to be making those decisions.
Right, let's bring our sports correspondent Rob Harris for more on this. Rob, afternoon to you. So, look, will he, won't he? Where can we see Gareth next?
Well, will we see him back in club management? It's interesting, he's talking about maybe a role outside football, and his leadership qualities and lessons were very much in demand. Just last week he was doing an event at a bank, actually, with Sir Tony Blair. But you really get a sense he needs to recharge, he needs a rest, because he found some of that intensity around him quite bruising at the Euros, and perhaps a loss of perspective as well, which he was alluding to there. People forgetting he was the first England men's manager since 1966 to take the Three Lions to finals, although he did just fall short on the trophy. He gave England fans highs they hadn't experienced for many years. But, you know, we've not seen him in club football since Middlesbrough in 2009, although, interestingly, he has close connections with those now running Manchester United, as do those around him. So perhaps he will always be someone who will be touted for that job, but certainly a sense that he is needing to be getting refreshed.
Indeed, and you said the words Manchester United. All right, Rob, nice one. Thank you. OK, you're watching Sky News Today. Still to come. Next hour, we'll look at that debate, Trump versus Harris, and bring you all the reaction following last night's event. Stay with us. Good afternoon. It is 2 o'clock. You're watching Sky News Today. Your headlines. The second handshake in 12 hours as Kamala Harris and Donald Trump join 9/11 commemoration events following their debate last night that included that bizarre claim about immigrants eating pets.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people. So let's be clear about that. And clearly he is having a very difficult time processing that.
The Prime Minister accused of hiding the impact of cuts to winter fuel payments for some pensioners by Rishi Sunak. Steel deal. The government reveals its plans for the country's biggest plant and made a promise to workers set to lose their jobs. Justice at last. The man jailed for life for the murder of a shopkeeper more than 30 years ago has his conviction quashed. And no regrets. Former England manager Gareth Southgate tells Sky News that he stood down at the right time and is ready for a return to management.
I've got lots of opportunities. I'm very open-minded to what's next. That might be in football, that might be outside of football. I'm just going to take some time, refresh, recharge, and go from there.
Well, good afternoon. Now, Donald Trump has been speaking following his head-to-head with Kamala Harris last night, their first debate ahead of the November election. Well, early polls suggest approval ratings are up for Kamala Harris following that event, and she also was able to secure the support of Taylor Swift. Now, Trump made his views on Taylor Swift clear earlier today. We'll bring you what he said in just a moment. First, more of the debate, which included bizarre comments made by Trump about immigrants eating pets. Our US correspondent Mark Stone reports.
The ABC News presidential debate.
From the very first moment, Kamala Harris tried to own the stage.
Kamala Harris.
The handshake we had wondered about was forced on Donald Trump in his space and with an introduction to boot. Because this was the first time these two candidates for the presidency had ever come face to face. 90 minutes to present America with its choice. And from the off, blistering exchanges on an issue that could swing this election.
But her vice presidential pick says abortion in the 9th month is absolutely fine. He also says execution after birth. It's execution, no longer abortion, because the baby is born, is okay. And that's not okay with me.
First came the moderator's fact check.
There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born.
Then Harris's response, her core pitch to every woman in America.
And one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree. The government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body.
Harris's strategy was to get under Donald Trump's skin, and she certainly seemed to.
And I'm going to actually do something really unusual, and I'm going to invite you to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom.
People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go.
He then went where his advisors probably hoped he wouldn't.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.